What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the In the Dome podcast. Okay, today we have a very special guest joining us on the show. His name is Kent Wilson. He's a Twitter beast. I think you knew about Kent long before I did because we just joined Twitter, a year and a half ago. Maybe I'll let you do the intro and we'll go from there.
Well, he's been a long time analytics follow. If you're a Flames fan, he's kind of like the first guy in Calgary to really get into the analytics scene. He's kind of up there with guys who, work for NHL teams now. Like Tyler Dellow was a guy up at Oilers Nation who now works for the New Jersey Devils. So Kent was kind of like that guy back in the day. He was like the only one in Calgary really doing any work in analytics or doing analytical analysis. So he wrote for Flamesnation for a really long time. That's kind of where I first came across his work. I think he was at Matchsticks and Gasoline for a while too, another Flames blog. And then he went over to The Athletic, I think in like 2016, 2017. And that's where I really kind of started being exposed to a lot of his work. He just did a lot of really great work that you weren't seeing elsewhere in Flames coverage. And he's kind of just been like a really good Twitter follow ever since. He's like kind of like the Yoda of hockey analytics in Calgary, right? When you've got most of the media going, "Oh, Johnny Gaudreau sucks. Johnny sucks." You have Kent like, "No, he's really good. Shut up." So naturally, he was a good read. He's a great analytics guy. It's good anytime we have a guest because it kind of forces me to be on my best behavior. But yeah, really smart guy. Always has some really good insights. I just remember the Glenn Gullison year. He was like, as frustrated as I was. It's like, why can't they win? Why? It's like they're playing good. They can't win. And it was like every article I would read by him, I'm just like, they can't win and they're so good. God damn it. So.
All right. So today's episode, we're getting in. We asked Kent a lot of questions. Some of them are what to do with Matthew Tkachuk. Where does Matthew Tkachuk's career trajectory going to look like? What do you do with Johnny Gaudreau?
What do you do with poor Sean Monahan?
What do you do with poor Sean Monahan? What's the defense going to look like with Gio leaving the team? And then we talk a little bit about 18-19, and then mostly spend time on the off-season acquisitions and what the future of this team is going to look like in the next 1 to 2 seasons, and if we're actually good enough to make the playoffs and maybe beyond. So without further ado, Kent Wilson.
And a little bit of Oilers hate. We got to throw it in there.
Sprinkle it on.
All right, man. So what's the deal with Matthew Tkachuk? Everybody seems to think he sucks all of a sudden. What was your take on Tkachuk's season last year?
Was he actually as bad as people say he was?
Probably not. The big problem with Tkachuk, his perception is he improved so much in the first few seasons in Calgary. Like he got better and better and better. And last year he didn't really do that. He kind of ran in place. You could see a lot of frustration in his game last year. Part of it, I'm sure, is the way the season and the team went. Part of it was he looked like a player who'd watched too many of his own highlights, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like he had like the number one highlight on TSN after he scored that between the legs overtime goal against Nashville. And then he tried that, like variations of that throughout the entire year. And, Tkachuk is skilled and he can pull those off, but his real game is meat and potatoes, spade work, down low. He knows the game fundamentally. And that's the player that is truly high impact for the Calgary Flames. He's not Johnny Gaudreau. And when he tries to be Johnny Gaudreau too much, it detracts from his true game.
It's funny you bring that game up because I think that was a big turning point for a lot of Flames fans. We talk about this game quite a bit on our podcast because I don't know why, but all the games with Nashville seem to be roller coasters, especially in Nashville. But that game in particular, I'm not sure if that was the Halloween night one or not, but that game in particular, the Flames go ahead. I think it was Backlund to Mangiapane with like a minute left, like unreal play. Then the Preds tie it up, and you're like, oh shit, or maybe I'm getting myself wrong.
No, that was a different game because the Flames lost that one.
Right, lost that one. They tied it and then lost with 30 seconds. I remember.
Right.
Yeah.
So then this game with between the legs, what happened is the roles get reversed. So Nashville goes ahead with about a minute left. And then I remember I'm watching the game live. It cuts to the bench, and everybody on the bench, the whole the pan across, the Flames heads are down. They're like, oh, fuck. And then Chucky's at the end of the bench. So he's the last guy the camera hits. And he's got one leg hanging over the bench. He's mounted on his mouth guard. He's like itching to get over the boards. And then he's the guy that ties it up. And he's the guy that scores the 5th greatest goal of all time.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I went back and I watched that game again because it was just incredible. But the way he played drive the entire game, he was all over it. And I think, if you go, anybody goes back and watches that game, there's the meat and potatoes that you're talking about, just all over the ice.
And do you think that was like a switch in his mind, or like what is his, how did he get to this point where he's kind of, trying to be Johnny Gaudreau? Like, what is he thinking?
I mean, he's pretty young still right now. And I remember the first time I ever really scouted him live, it was at one of the prospects sort of games or tournaments, and it was like a scrimmage. And I remember, I think he was 18 at the time, is right after they drafted him. And I thought his board work is absolutely NHL quality right now. Like, he is doing incredible stuff along the boards and down low. But I think I noted it, or in my head, I said, he needs to walk the line with the antics, because there was a lot of extra stuff. And you could tell sometimes it was beneficial and sometimes it wasn't. Now, some of this goes back to like the puck flip and maybe the team getting mad at him for it and that sort of thing. But you can tell he's so competitive. He's always looking for an edge. And I think the edge he was looking for last year was like, okay, I'm the highest paid player on the team. I need to like up the skill game. And, having the #1 highlight on TSN all summer probably didn't help, right? And they need someone just to go back and sit him down and like, listen, you are skilled, but your true impact is around the net and along the boards and anticipating play. It's not dangling through 3 guys.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're looking at, you bring up a good point. He flatlined last season. You're sitting here as a fan, you're trying to figure out why. Obviously, there's a lot of probably factors go into it. COVID's got to be one of them. This guy probably is a guy that thrives under, in front of a big stage, big crowd. Obviously, the lines shift. I mean, the style of game shifts, or the style of play for the Flames shifts. He's got a new centerman in Lindholm, and they're asked to be the top play drivers on the team. I don't know. We kind of go back and forth. If you're looking at potential new lineups this season, I guess it still makes sense to keep Lindholm and Chucky together. But does he play better with Backlund?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question, because that was just a killer duo for years. But I think they should be looking to elevate Tkachuk. And when he played with Gaudreau and Lindholm last year, that was a really good line. That was a legitimately good power versus power matchup. So I think if those, get those impact players going together and move Backlund into more of a support role.
I'm kind of curious what the future holds for Tkachuk, as are a lot of Flames fans.
Yeah.
Kind of looming over everything is this like qualifying offer being at $9 million. Everyone's like, I don't know if he's a $9 million player. Mm-hmm. Where do you kind of see his trajectory going? Because like you said, he's still very young, but I think you kind of have a certain segment of people in the fan base who are like, oh, he can't skate. You've seen his game flatline the last 2 years. He's not a guy you want to be investing in long-term, and especially at, huge dollars. Like, where do you kind of can you kind of foresee a path of development for Matthew Tkachuk? Where does this kind of go throughout his kind of peak 24, 25, 26 age range?
I think we have a couple years to find out, but the issue is less that. I think Matthew Tkachuk is probably a 90th percentile impact player at worst. I think he could be probably better than that. But even last year, he was in that range, even though he didn't really move forward. So the issue for the Flames is can they convince him that he wants to be here long term? Can they be a competitive franchise? Can they say, this should be your home? And I think they have, 2 years to do that. And I think they have to do that with Gaudreau over the next year. They have to do it with Tkachuk. If they don't, it's rebuild time, because all these guys are going to say, I don't really want to be here long term. I mean, they have 1 year with Gaudreau now, and then if he doesn't want to sign, they got to trade him for parts at the deadline or lose him for nothing in free agency. And then Tkachuk is obviously an RFA, but he can just, take his qualifying offer, stick around for a year or two, and then go via unrestricted free agency. And by that time, you have Tanev, who's probably aged out. You got Backlund, who's probably aged out. Markstrom, who knows how good he'll be at like 33. So the team, is facing this sort of existential pivot point in the next 2 years.
Yeah, I know. We've seen you've been pretty vocal about you probably would have had already started the rebuild if you were managing this team. They're not, obviously. They're still going for it. So they're probably, I mean, if you look at Brad Treliving's contract, Darryl Sutter's contract, you're looking at the next 1 or 2 years, they're probably going to try and make something happen in that time.
Yeah.
If you contrast that with the decision to rebuild now, I'm just curious from your perspective, how much does that hurt you to continue to wait and wait and wait? Like, does it increase your risk of this thing just imploding and you got to backtrack?
It does. Yeah. So like, if they don't make something of themselves the next 2 years, they've set their rebuild back pretty badly because, you probably lose Gaudreau and a handful of guys for nothing or for pennies on the dollar.
Sounds
and you've
familiar.
missed out on on 2 drafts where there's all these generational talents near the top end of the draft. So you've missed those. You haven't won anything, and you're losing a bunch of guys. And then you have a bunch of other guys, aging into a relative obsolescence. So it'll be tougher to rebuild 2 years from now than it would have been this year. So that's, that said, if they don't do anything between now and the start of the season to improve this team and really go for it, it's going to be really disappointing.
So what if they don't do that and then they have a tough stretch this season and are on the outside looking in, heading into the trade deadline, heading into the offseason? What happens?
They're crazy if they don't start to sell. They're crazy because Gaudreau's not going to stick around. Why would he? There's a lot of talk of this offseason, like, why haven't they re-signed Gaudreau? And I'm sure the team would like to. But if I'm that player, I'm saying, prove to me that I should stay here. Like, I like, the city and the team, but I want to win. And if you guys don't prove that you can do that, then I'm going to go, I can write my own ticket when I'm an unrestricted free agent, right? So he's getting paid either way. So why don't we wait to see if he can win somewhere?
Yeah.
And then I guess I
think we could all think of 9 good reasons. To keep both Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau sticking around. If you can somehow make a deal for Jack Eichel, we'll touch on Jack Eichel in a bit, but as far as Matthew Tkachuk's qualifying offer, that seems to be the other big argument on Twitter. People are all up in arms. This guy's not worth $9 million. Obviously, he plateaued last season, but where you project him to go, do you think he's going to be worth $9 million?
I think so. And then it obviously depends on what he does in the next couple of years. You never really know, but he's a player whose trajectory came out of the draft with a great pedigree, made the team as a teenager, has been nothing but great ever since, aside from like a plateau last year. And even then, he's still one of the best players on the team.
Yeah.
I mean, unless he takes drastic steps backwards in the next 2 years, he'll be worth that.
And quickly, before we move past, Chucky, what's your take on the rumors?
The rumors of him wanting out?
Yeah, the rumors of the whole Jake Muzzin, the team told him to tone it down, the management told him to tone it down, and then now he wants out, he wants to go back to St. Yada, yada, yada.
I don't love speculating on stuff I can't possibly say. I mean, it's plausible, of course, given what we saw, and he's an American, and sure, but I can only say it's plausible, but I can't say whether or not it's true.
Do you feel like there was a direct correlation with kind of his drop off in play last season with around the time the puck flip happened?
Yes, but that's seductive, right? There's a lot of this happened and then this happened, so they caused each other. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in an NHL season that don't really have anything to do with each other. So it's I guess it's possible, but I mean, the Flames went through so many ups and downs last year, to connect, point A to point B is somewhat tenuous.
I think the other big question of next offseason is obviously on Mangiapane.
Yeah.
What are we projecting there? What are you thinking? Because I think he's kind of getting lost in all this. Everyone's like, Gaudreau, Tkachuk. Is he going to get paid? Are they going to keep kicking that can down the road? I don't think they can afford to any longer.
No, I would resign him as soon as possible because I think next year he explodes.
No,
He's going to play in the
absolutely.
top 6. He's, one of the best even strength producers on this team, one of the best play drivers on this team. And if they wait, it's going to be more expensive.
He's going to win it. He's going to win a Selke trophy before they have him sign or something ridiculous at this point.
That's how you know they're going to wait with what you just said.
Well, the team has played hardball with him twice now. So, the next contract, they're not getting a discount. So don't wait. Sign him when you can.
Okay. So let's go to Darryl Sutter. Thoughts on the Darryl Sutter hire? I don't know if you want to touch on Ward, if you were a big fan or not.
No.
And this is the podcast for you, sir.
Yeah, no, we're definitely not Ward fans at all. We were kind of on the fence at first with Darryl, and then we were kind of like, well, let's see how it works, what happens. They ended the season pretty well defensively, but let's hear your thoughts as a whole on the Darryl Sutter hire and what you've seen so far.
Yeah, I guess we'll start with Ward. I mean, the team was just too in between worlds. Like they weren't good offensively, they weren't good defensively. He couldn't seem to figure out the combinations on the front or back. He couldn't seem to pick a lane, you know what I mean, with the team, or if he was trying to, the players weren't going with him. We could see, halfway through last season that it was over. They completely bottomed out. There was no going forward. It really reminded me of the end of Glenn Bellitzen here, where it was just nobody seemed to have an answer. So I was glad he was replaced. Sutter, I've always had time for him as a coach, less as a GM, of course, but Sutter knows what he wants out of a team. He can usually get it, at least for a short period of time. He's fantastic as a defensive guy. He always finds a way to limit chances against, and his teams always have good possession numbers. So he's not going to be forward thinking in terms of he's not going to be the most innovative coach in the world, but he does tend to extract the most out of a roster that you can, at least for a couple of years.
And then some of the additions, obviously, this offseason were they're all Sutter-like players.
Yeah.
What do you think of those additions as a whole? We'll probably get into some individuals, but obviously, it kind of makes me think that Darryl Sutter was actually behind a lot of these acquisitions that we've seen, because they all really fit really well into the Sutter brand of hockey. Do you think as a whole, I mean, up front, it's hard to argue, but do you think as a whole, the team got better in terms of, acquiring with a vision, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to hire Sutter, you might as well build a roster that's, tailored to that coach. Right. So I have a lot of time for filling the bottom end of your roster with players of a certain ilk. And I don't just mean big guys, because big guys can be totally useless on an NHL team. But at least a lot of the guys they got are very good defensively. You can see it in their underlying numbers. They're erasers, right? They make shots and chances against difficult. They're not great offensively. So part of the reason I think the Flames really need to do something in the rest of this offseason is because all of the offense is going to come from the top of the rotation.
Yeah.
And if they don't have enough offense there, it's going to make life really difficult for this team, especially if anyone gets injured. In the top 6, if you see Gaudreau or Lindholm or Tkachuk go down for any length of time, you're going to have to win every game 2-1. And, it's possible but that's a tough way to play an entire season, right? So you saw Tampa Bay kind of do this, like when they won their cup there and they got Gaudreau, they got Coleman, they filled the bottom of the roster with guys who are hard to play against. And I don't mean that as euphemism of guys who run around and hit people. They make scoring on you more difficult. But the reason that works for Tampa Bay is they have a lot of offense anyways, right? At the top of the rotation. So if Calgary's going to go down that road, get more offense, please.
So is Coleman, can you see Coleman's eraser type effect being playing higher up in the lineup, being effective for this team? Like, because I think we can all agree we like the addition of Blake Coleman, contract maybe notwithstanding, but I think to just plug him in as a guy who's going to be relied on to score a lot of goals, I'm not sure about that just yet. What are your thoughts on like Coleman playing in the top 6 as it appears he's going to be and relied on for offense?
I have a lot of time for Coleman. Even his contract wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Right.
UFA contracts are what they are. You got to pay to play with UFA. So I thought he was going to get $6 million.
Oh yeah, me too.
At 4.9, I was like, okay, well that's not
bargain.
terrible. Yeah. His even strength offense is pretty good. I think he had the same rate of offense last year as Andrew Mangiapane. So he's kind of that level of player. He drives play. He does score enough that if you need him in a top 6 position, you can play him there. I mean, the real problem for Calgary is either going to be Monahan and their center depth. So if Monahan doesn't come back to what he used to be, the center depth is very strange. You got Lindholm, you got Backlund, who's, I have a lot of time for Backlund, but at this point you should be wanting him to play a two to three center role at best. Yeah. And if Monahan can't do what he used to do, he's not even a 3C. I don't know what to do with him, quite frankly, because he can't score. He's not good defensively. So they're gambling a lot if that doesn't come back. So, and of course they don't have any right wingers, like at all. They've got a bunch of left wingers playing right wing. So
I'm just curious to pull on the Monahan thread a little bit. I know you've written about this before, but like, what happened to this guy? Like, because I look at him and it's like I can't pinpoint, other than injuries.
Yeah,
I can't pinpoint this steep of a decline over the last couple of seasons. Like,
I guess you never really know unless you're close to the situation. But his neutral zone game has really fallen off. I talked to Jack Han, who used to work for the Toronto Marlies, and he does a lot of scouting work, obviously, on Twitter. And he just said, like, Monahan doesn't carry the puck anymore. Mm-hmm. He can't carry it through the neutral zone. And the other thing we saw last year is, I mean, he used to be an absolute killer anywhere near the net. I mean, you get him in the slot or the high slot, puck's going in. And his release seemed to be gone last year. He couldn't find pucks in his skates. He couldn't hunt pucks down. And if he got them, they weren't on net or they weren't dangerous. So his skating and his shots have sort of abandoned him to a non-trivial degree. And that was, a lot of his skating was never a strength. So when you undermine that to a significant degree, and then you undermine his main strength, which was his shot, it makes it tough because he was never great defensively anyways.
Yeah, there's that that one highlight I remember. I think they were playing the Leafs or something. Gaudreau gives him a feed right in the slot. He puts it into like row 50. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it flipped off his stick and went up into the crowd, and it's like, what happened here? And that is not, classic Monahan at all.
It's funny, like it seems to be that the team asked him to get bigger, which he did, and then B started asking him to play more defense, which he did. And right around the same time, then you see all these other changes in his game. I'm curious to see it. I'd be curious to know how much of his drop off is just due to the team asking him to do things that probably they shouldn't have.
Yeah, you actually saw the team after the big disappointment against Tampa Bay. They kind of wanted Gaudreau and Monahan as a combination to become more of a two-way threat and get better defensively. And you can try that, but that's not who they are.
Yeah. And did you mean the disappointment against Colorado?
Sorry, Colorado, correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they had the last sort of quarter of the season, and then they choked against Colorado, and then you could see the team try to figure out, okay, we need these guys to be more. We don't want to score goals anymore. They need to be more than they are. They need to defend more. And it's like, you can wish that, you could try it, but you could see that was never going to work.
Yeah.
And that's not who either of those players are.
Yeah, we've spent quite a bit of time, just because I don't know about you, but I sure enjoyed watching hockey 18-19. It was fun. Turn the TV on,
most of it,
expecting them to win, and then they do. Like I can get used to that.
Yeah.
But like we've talked about, I mean, you mentioned it, the team seemed to go in a completely different direction after 18-19. Jeff Ward was even quoted the season following that, saying, "You saw what happened when we tried to be a scoring team."
Yeah.
I don't know why he said tried, because you were a scoring team.
Yeah.
I don't know. We feel that the team maybe or I don't
He
know,
overcompensated for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
and did they realize that this was Colorado's breakout party? Since that moment that they defeated us, they've been one of the top 3 teams in the league. Do you necessarily have to go recreate the wheel after getting, punked by a team that's now going to be a Stanley Cup contender for the next 5 years?
It kind of depends on how you do it, right? So you saw Tampa Bay the same year got swept by Columbus. And to some degree, you have to take anything that happens in the playoffs with a grain of salt. It's a very small sample, and anyone can be bad in 4 to 7 games. It just happens. Even when you watch a season, I used to do the 7-game segment pieces on The Athletic, and I did that for a reason. So you could see the ups and downs during a season relative to what would be a 7-game series in a playoff. And sometimes a team's great, sometimes it's bad, and it just is. There's highly variable performances, period, because we're all human. But what you saw Tampa Bay do is what I talked about. They went out and they filled the bottom end of the roster with guys who are to play, and after that they had this brutal matchup machine that they created. So you could put out almost any line in the defensive zone against anybody. And so what they did with that was they gave Kucherov the high road the entire time. I think the year they won the cup, he had a zone start of 70%. Like almost every offensive zone faceoff went to their best offensive player. So they didn't go to Kucherov and say, you need to be a Selke winner now.
You're getting defensive starts. Yeah.
Right. They went out and got great defensive players, put them at the bottom of the roster, and let their horses run. Right. So they learned the right lessons, and the Flames didn't.
Oh, frustrates me at all end.
It's easy. Honestly, it's easy from where we're sitting, right? It's, we're using hindsight. It's very easy now, but I have some sympathy for, having to build and manage an NHL roster.
So do you see this Darryl Sutter hire as maybe they're actually going about it the right way now? They wanted to be a defensive team. They tried it by saying, oh, well, we're going to be a defensive team by Johnny and Monty. You guys are going to be Selke candidates next year. Do you see this hire? Can you see Darryl Sutter having a Barry Trotz like effect this upcoming season?
Potentially, if anyone can do it, it's him. And people have to remember that Sutter does like a certain style of game, and he values big guys who can play defensively, but he also has skilled players on his team. He traded for Christian Uselius. He traded for Alex Tanguay. I mean, these were not big hulking dudes who were scrambling guys' brains on the boards. They were highly skilled, right? So he has time for that. He knows that you have to score goals. But it'll be interesting to see what he can do with this roster, because this roster has not been it hasn't been well used for a while. They've had a lot of coaches kind of struggling to find their way for a few years now, outside of like the first 3 quarters of 18-19, right? So it'll be interesting to see what an established high-end coach can do here.
Yeah, when we look across the league, it seems like with the Darryl Sutter hire and just the way this team apparently wants to play now, the Islanders might be a good comparable. We haven't really looked at their underlyings in terms of do the teams match up, but I mean, it's not like the Islanders have a lot of high-end skill other than Barzell. And they just lost Eberle, but if Barry Trotz can do it over there, you would think that it's got to be possible.
Yeah, but to be fair, I mean, the Islanders have outperformed expectations. They haven't won anything.
Yep.
So for the Flames, I mean, making it to the second round would be great, because we rarely do that. But in the end, if you guys want to win a cup, I mean, you got to build a Colorado Avalanche. You got to build a Tampa Bay Lightning. You have to build guys who are at the top of the. I mean, Colorado doesn't want anything either, but they're going to. I mean, it's almost inevitable. Just look at that roster and look at how they rolled through most of the competition last year. Even the Vegas Golden Knights would be nice, because they're always there. They're always competing. So build a contender. You can do it here. You're a cap team. Figure it out.
If you go back to 18-19, like you just said, we have hindsight. What would you have done? What would you have done? Would you have continued? I mean, I don't see how you can just write off all of 18-19 and say, okay, the success we had, doesn't mean anything because we lost in the playoffs. Would you have just added differently to the roster? What would you have done in hindsight to continue to build this roster?
So the big question I had exiting that season, and especially that first playoffs round, was what the hell happened, especially to the first line, because up until the All-Star game of that year, they were just murdering almost anyone they played against. They were one of the best trios in the league.
Yep.
And then Monahan and Gaudreau came back from the All-Star game break, and there was just nothing there. Like, it had already started by then. And the reason the Flames maintained was the rest of the roster was pretty good. And in fact, you had like the rise of Mangiapane playing with, I think, Garnet Hathaway and Derek Ryan.
Yeah.
And they just killed for the last quarter, and that kind of masked what was going on with the top line. And then you get into the first round, they get just beaten to death by Colorado. And it actually wasn't just the top line, it was everybody. You could tell the Colorado game plan for Calgary, and the Flames didn't. They didn't know what was coming at them. So in the offseason, I thought, you guys need you need a first line center, or you need to figure out what to do with Monahan, because already by then I said, Monahan is this great sniper and offensive player. He is not a two-way player. And if he goes up against the McKinnons of the world, Gaudreau is who he is, but you're not gonna compete against true top line centers in the playoffs with a Monahan. So either they had to figure out what was going on there, and they didn't. They went the opposite way and asked those players to be someone they weren't. Or you have to get a player that can supplement them. And the big miss, of course, was Mark Stone when he became available. So he would have solved a lot of problems for this team, because he is that player, right? He is a legitimate 95th percentile, a play driver and offensive player, and he's a right wing. So I understand why that was probably very difficult to do. They didn't really have the cap space at the time, and they didn't have a guarantee he was going to sign with them, as Vegas did. But those were that sort of period where they missed out on figuring that out, or getting a Mark Stone was the big issue for me.
What do you think is kind of behind this? I don't know, because we've kicked this around a lot. It's like, we always come back to this Mark Stone thing. Is like, well, they didn't add when they were the best team in the West and the second best team in the league. They didn't add when they were not very good the next year. It's just kind of like this hesitancy. Is it risk aversion? Like, what do you think is kind of behind Brad Treliving's tendency to just kind of let things play out without intervening in any big sense?
Yeah, I don't think it's any of that. I think what happened over the years is they spent a lot of cap space and a lot of futures on getting the team that they had. And then by the time they got to that point, they were sort of painted into a corner. So like I said, with Mark Stone, if they were asking for Valimaki, that was like the one blue chip prospect that Calgary had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then if Mark Stone was asking for $9 million a year in cap, they didn't even really know how they were going to do that going into that season, because they were worried about Tkachuk. They had to grind Mangiapane down to like a ridiculous offer. Like it was tough sledding going into that offseason. So they didn't really have a way to guarantee that he would resign with them. So as this goes along and you have less futures and less cap space and less flexibility, it gets harder and harder to make those kind of moves.
So would you make the Jack Eichel trade right now then? If you had to give up everything and do anything to make it work?
Depends on what I would, the rumored asks, like the stuff like Zary and Monahan and the first and maybe Valimaki, I would do that. But maybe they're asking for Tkachuk and Zary and Peltier in the first, and it starts to get like, well, then we don't have a team. Like, the only reason we're trading for Eichel right now is to go for it. And if you just strip the other impact players from our roster, then that doesn't make sense.
What do you think about the whole Eichel situation? Because can Buffalo really start next season with this guy on their roster? And the longer this thing goes,
it's very silly.
Does the asking price not get lowered? And apparently there's only a small handful of teams still in on it, according to Elliot Friedman. You never really know. But how do you see this thing actually playing out? Do you think the Flames actually have a shot at landing Jack Eichel?
I've been trying to figure out the Buffalo Sabres kind of angle to this as this has gone on. And part of it, I think, is they're not going to compete next year anyways. They don't care if they lose every game next year because they're not going to win if Michael's on the team or not. So I think they're leveraging the like, I don't give a shit sort of position that they're in to say, we want to get this package. And if we don't get this, then you can sit out and we can lose. I don't care. But you're right. Like at some point, like he's got to still have surgery or have some whatever he's going to do for his back, and that's going to take 1 month, 2 months, 3, however long it's going to take. So, if someone trades for him at the start of the year, then they don't have him for 3 months, and a lot of teams won't even have the cap space to trade for him at the start of the year. You'd probably have to wait till the trade deadline at that point, and then he's only got 4 years left on his contract. So you would think that over time, that price has to start going down at some point. But that said, I mean, I think they kind of played this game with Matt Duchene in Colorado, and they got a king's ransom for that guy. So maybe they're looking at that and going, let's do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit of a similar situation.
Yeah. And Matt Duchene is not Jack Eichel.
No.
So
you mentioned something earlier about the Flames. If they don't do anything more, it's probably a bit of a disappointment. What do you think is the number one need for this team still right now as the roster looks currently?
It's definitely a top line center.
Yeah.
Just because of what I said about Monahan, right? Even if Monahan comes back 100%, he still has to be sheltered. He's still that guy who could score and probably outscore his weaknesses, but he needs a certain set of circumstances to do that. And the Flames, therefore, still don't have a true power versus power matchup. I mean, the Lindholm line is very good. They're going to outcompete the bottom end of any of the Western Conference. They'll probably do well against other mediocre teams, but when you start getting into Tampa Bay territory or Colorado, probably not. Lindholm versus McKinnon, Lindholm versus Kucherov. That's tough. And I like Lindholm as a player, but probably not going to win that matchup, right? And then after that, it starts, the scoring starts falling off. I mean, you're asking Michael Backlund to be, second line center and the scoring center. And, he's a 55-point player in a good year. And he's pretty good play driver, but he's 32, I think, at this point. And it's starting to ask a lot, right? So it's either that or a top line right winger. They haven't had that since Iginla. So we keep waiting for them to get, they tried Brouwer, they tried Neal. They did a, Hail Mary with Curtis Lazar. They keep trying to put something on the right-hand side. And, they can have Tkachuk or Mangiapane or, Coleman is a left-handed right winger, but it would be really nice to have a legitimate right-handed top six right winger.
Based on the offseason acquisitions we've seen so far, where do you slot this team in the Pacific Division? Obviously, it's one of the weaker divisions on paper. Like, are we good enough to make the playoffs?
I think so, depending on injuries and stuff like that. Like, because the offense is going to be slim if they don't add. If you have the wrong kind of injuries to this team, they probably don't make the playoffs. But if they're relatively healthy, I think they can. The question is, what's the point?
Right. Yep.
You make the playoffs, maybe win a first round, but as soon as you hit one of those top line teams, unless you have a Cinderella Montreal PDO run or Calgary back in the day, everything, nothing goes in or everything goes in for you. You're not going anywhere. You're not beating the best teams in the West.
Which seems to be kind of, they obviously always take the wrong lessons. They looked at Montreal and were like, let's try to do that instead of, looking at Tampa Bay and Vegas and saying, let's try to do that.
Do that instead. Exactly. So, Montreal is a lottery ticket. Everyone else is, you want to compete and be a contender year after year, because in the end, you have a 1 in 5 chance, even if you're the best team in the league, of winning the Stanley Cup. So try to be the best team in the league for 5 years in a row and win a cup.
And I mean, like, how do you see this defense functioning? Because I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the forward group, but I mean, there's a huge hole that's been left behind by Mark Giordano. If I'm looking at this roster right now, that defense is still kind of a big question mark for me.
And the funny thing is the defense looks better than it should just because Tanev had like an incredible season last year, just out of nowhere, bonkers. Maybe he does it again, but if he doesn't do that again, even if he's 75% as good as he was last year, it's Hanifin and him. You have to ask Anderson to take a big step forward after a big step back last year. You have to hope Valimaki does the same. And I'm pretty bullish on Valimaki, but you never really know. And he kind of stalled last year. So, and then you're right. You have Zadorov, who is at best a top 4 defenseman, but probably I put him on the third pairing if I could. And then, Mackey, Shillington, Michael Stone, when they inevitably re-sign him. Yeah, that's depth, I guess, but not really.
See, Ken says Zadorov too. I always say Zadorov, and everybody gives me shit for it. It's Zadorov. It's totally Zadorov.
I'm going with Zadorov.
But you're right. Like, it's a lot of question marks. It's if Tanev is somehow just as incredible as he was last year, which is
and doesn't get injured for the first time
in his career. He's only what's his career high in games played? Like 70? Like, what if he gets hurt?
Yeah, the crazy part is they played him for the last month of the year. And he was injured. It's like, what are you thinking, guys?
Yeah, what do you have, a broken rib or something?
Yeah, torn pec too.
It was just nuts. It's like you're not making the playoffs. What are you playing this 30-year-old defenseman for? It's just, I don't know.
Totally insane. And I mean, like you said, like I know Noah Hanifin, like, I mean, from what I've seen, I've seen a guy who can probably be a pretty solid second pairing guy. I haven't seen in the time he's been here, like, much indication that he can replace a guy like Mark Giordano.
No, I mean, I think Hanifin is what he is right now. He's a solid top 4 guy, and he's elevated by better partners, but he's dragged down by guys who are even marginally worse than him. He kind of goes either way. Sure. He does not anchor pairings. He's pretty good, and at what he's paid, he's probably worth it. But no, he's not at Mark Giordano.
And like I've been trying to explain to people, like, they're like, oh, Gio's gone. He was old anyways. Like, he brings so much to the table. What are kind of like the irreplaceable or very difficult to replace elements that Mark Giordano brought to this team that on this decor probably are absent in your mind?
Well, he was the best even strength scorer on this blue line for one, even when he was, wasn't the Norris guy anymore. He was probably one of the best power play scorers on this team, and he played the toughest minutes on this team. Those are massive gaps, right? Mm-hmm. And they lost Brody a year before that, and he did many of the similar things. He didn't score the way Giordano did, but he also played some of the toughest minutes. So they've lost those 2 guys for nothing in 2 years, and they're lucky as hell that Tanev came up and was what he was, and we'll see how long that lasts. But yeah, they have nothing proven beyond those 2 guys. And I was really optimistic about Anderson before his giant step back last year. And I think he can be a top 2 guy, but that remains to be seen.
What do you think happened with Anderson? Was it just like he couldn't handle the minutes? He was asked to perform a role that maybe wasn't suited to him, a partner thing, probably a combination of all these things?
Yeah, it was very strange because Anderson and Giordano had played somewhat together previously, and they'd had pretty good results. And then they both came out and just looked awful for the first 6 weeks of the year. And, it was a weird season, right? There was a limited practice, not much of a training camp. Who knows what it was but Anderson isn't a pure tools guy, right? He's limited in his skating. He's not huge. He's a guy who thinks the game pretty well, but he just seemed really out of sync for at least the first half of last season. So maybe a more regular, routine and season will help him. We'll see.
It seems to be that a lot of the team defensive play actually got a lot better when Sutter took over and the team adjusted as well. So I'm banking on that for all these. I mean, but I hate going into a new season just hoping, all these things are going to turn out well.
But that's the life of a Flames fan.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We're at the cycle. We're at the threshold where it's just like we're convincing ourselves that the kind of marginal tinkering on the edges is like, this is actually going to work this time, you guys. It's going to work this time. I believe.
Yeah, I'm not convincing myself of anything. I am going into this with eyes wide open because I've seen this play before.
Exactly. If you were the GM, how would you have handled the Geo situation? I mean, as soon as you signed Tanev last year, you automatically know you're probably exposing Geo. Then the team is obviously not making the playoffs.
I would have traded him at the deadline.
Think of what you could have got for him at the deadline. You still knew at the deadline you were probably going to expose Mark Giordano. How does he let this play out the way it did and then get away with letting it play out the way he did?
It seems that they wanted to find a way to keep him, go into the offseason and say, Gio's a big part of this team, is the captain. We're still trying to compete, so let's find a way to keep him, and they didn't. So that is a failure. But I would have traded him. They traded Bennett for a similar reason. Like they weren't going to be able to protect him in the expansion draft. They should have traded Derek Ryan. I have no idea how that didn't happen. They should have sold a lot harder at the deadline.
Would you have thought about? Maybe I've been galaxy braining this. Would you have thought about trading Tanev? What could you have got for Chris Tanev?
Yeah, I would say they should do that just because I'm on team.
Yeah.
Break it all down, rebuild aggressively. And after Tanev had that massive season that he had, you cash the chips in, but there's no way they were going to do that, obviously. Yeah. So, I would have traded Markstrom. I would have traded Tanev. I would have put everyone on the block. Like I said, they should have aggressively rebuilt this summer. And if they don't get someone like Eichel, I'm going to stick to that line of thinking. So,
well, I think we're all at that point where it's just been so 7-8 years of this. Well, if you want to go back 20, 30 years of this kind of circling the drain and tinkering.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what are the odds? I know I kind of asked you, if this team is in a situation where they're not in a playoff position come the trade deadline. I think we all agree they will be crazy not to sell. What are the odds that they do sell if they are not in a position where it looks like they make the playoffs at the trade deadline? Do you think there is a realistic possibility they start to tear it down this year if they're in that situation?
It depends on what you mean by sell. Like, is it all the unrestricted free agents? So if Gaudreau is still unsigned, do they sell him?
Everything.
Probably. But yeah, I've never seen them get aggressive at the trade deadline.
Yeah.
Almost never, right? Especially on the sell side. They usually one or two guys. And I think Sam Bennett's one of the biggest sell pieces they've had in recent memory. Probably Iginla was the last one.
Oh boy.
And that went horribly sideways because they should have sold him much earlier than that. But yeah, it's they should. Will they?
Yeah.
I kind of doubt it, quite honestly.
I mean, that could be the book of all Flames fans. They should do this. Probably won't. So
yeah.
So given the current roster, forward lineups and D pairings, how would you build this roster to start the season? Give us your line combos and your D pairings to start the season.
Or what they should be looking to do, like tactically as well, too, kind of.
I think you have to like concentrate the scoring in the top six if you can. Mm-hmm. It'll really depend on what version of Monahan you get coming into the year. If he's the guy we saw last year, you have to find a way to hide him at even strength as much as possible. So I put him down the rotation to start. But if he is Monahan, then you probably can put him in the top six with a Coleman and a Mangiapane. That line could probably score. You obviously have the Lindholm, Gaudreau, Tkachuk, a top line that has to pretty much go power versus power. And then it gets pretty tricky because then you have Backlund, Pitlick, Lucic, Lewis, who else?
Brett Ritchie.
Dubé, right? Yeah. And Dubé, it would be nice to see him take a step forward. I thought he was going to do it last year. And his scoring came along, but the rest of his game did not at all. He sank every line he was on, unfortunately. So, I mean, the third line's pretty tricky, given what we have right now. I don't know what you ask them to do almost in any combination. If you have Backlund and Pitlick, they're pretty good defensively. Dubé isn't. What do you do with him unless he's changed? And then you have Lucic and Lewis and whoever else is going to be on the fourth line. You're just going to hope that nothing happens when they're on the ice, except for maybe some body checks and some fights. On the back end, that's a little tougher. Hanifin Tanev is probably the top pairing, maybe. Who do you pair with Anderson is the question for me at this point. Is it Zadorov?
No, it's Zadorov.
Right. So that looks like a pretty plodding second pairing to me. Neither of those guys can skate very well. And then what's that third pairing exactly? You got Valimaki, who I'm betting they hope moves up the rotation aggressively, but right now you're not sure what to do with him. And who's on the right side there? Do they re-sign Stone and just give them marginal competition?
Yes.
Do they put Shillington on the right side and say, here, maybe you can do something over here? Is it Mackey, and then they put Valimaki on the right side and hope that that's something? So, the blue line scares me, especially if there's an injury to anyone at the top of the rotation. Then it's holy crap.
Well, I have night sweats, like imagining McDavid, Hyman hopping over the boards, and like Zadorov and Anderson are on the ice, and Lucic and Monahan are stuck on the ice. It's like, oh my Lord, like they're going to get creamed.
Yeah. Well, imagine them, because they're not stuck in the one division this year. Imagine them playing Tampa Bay, right? Oh. They have 3 lines that comes over the boards, like, oh crap. And I mean, they got stripped a little bit by the salary cap and the expansion draft, but they still scare the hell out of me.
Oh yeah.
So we touched on Eichel. We're all in for Eichel if it can happen. But say Eichel's off the table, given the lineup and the worries that you just voiced up front and at the back end, what can Brad still do that he should do just to bolster as much as he can this roster going into next season?
So there's nothing in free agency at this point that will move the needle, quite obviously. I'm intrigued by Tarasenko. He had the really good results up until last year, where he was obviously sunk by this shoulder issue. Now, if he can get over that, that is a legitimate top 6 winger for you, right? And you can maybe get him for pennies on the dollar, because those two parties are not getting along. And it's pretty clear that St. Louis doesn't want him there, and he doesn't want to be there anymore. So can you get that guy for something you absolutely could not have gotten him for even 2 years ago, right? And can you plug him into your top 6 and resurrect him? That's an interesting gamble for me. Other than that, maybe Christian Dvorak. I know he doesn't have great counting stats. If you look at his underlying numbers, they're pretty good, and he's young enough where you could say even a modest step forward above what he's done so far. He's a top 6 centerman. Now that's not Eichel territory, and it's not even Tarasenko territory if he rebounds, but it's something.
Okay. How about the back end? Are you think Brad is going to go into the offseason with this current back end or the next season?
I don't know what his options are at this point, honestly. Like all the guys I kind of wanted to see added to the back end are gone. I don't really know what's available for trade at this point. Seattle, maybe they're willing to trade some of those guys they got.
Probably trade for Gio,
be hilarious. But I think he's going to have to just it's going to be a Michael Stone type signing. Maybe Zdeno Chara will want one more year. Put him back there and let him intimidate people at 44.
Why do you think? I just want to ask you about Shillington.
Yeah,
it's not like I'm starting the Oliver Shillington fan club over here, but I have been a bit stumped as to why they have been so reticent to play him at all. Like, he only played 8 games last year, which honestly blows my mind with where the team was at and how much Nesterov was playing, how much Stone was playing. Like, do you have any theories as to why they don't like Shillington?
Absolutely. Shillington is the type of defenseman that NHL coaches don't want to play. He isn't very big. He's not very strong. So that, if you have a defenseman like that, it causes a lot of anxiety for NHL coaches, because they worry about clearing corners, they worry about stopping the cycle, and they worry about clearing the front of the net a lot with their defensemen. Now, there's a lot of guys who make a career in the NHL that aren't great at that. They score a lot. They're a constant threat. And the problem for Oliver Shillington is his offense has never really materialized at the pro level. And he's also the kind of guy who makes the big mistake, like that he can play 2 or 3 games where you don't really notice him, aside from, he's really good in transition. He's a fantastic skater. But that 4th game, he'll be in his own zone. He'll pass it directly to some guy on the other team. He'll fall down and the guy will have a breakaway.
Sounds
and
like
NHL
Lucic.
teams, will remember that forever, right? And when you couple that with the other weaknesses he has, he's not big, he's not strong, he's not great defensively, and he's not going to clear the front of the net. They're so reluctant to play players like that unless they're going back up the ice and they're scoring all the time.
So Lucic gets away with it because he can punch guys out.
And Lucic has, 10 years of being Lucic, right? He's won cups, he's scored, he is Milan Lucic. He has lots of runway, right?
He is pretty lovable, I gotta say.
Yeah, and he's just an established, known quantity. So yeah, he's getting more rope than a guy like Oliver Shillington. Shillington has to, if he doesn't clean up his weaknesses, he'll always be a 7 guy.
Yeah, I think those are all the Flames related questions that we had for you. But curious, you're a big analytics guy. How did you start in analytics? Like, maybe walk us through your little, how that looks for you.
So I played hockey when I was younger. My dad was a coach, and then he did summer schools, and then he coached my younger brother, and I helped coach him, and then I coached as a 20-year-old. So when blogs came along, I figured, hey, maybe I'll start writing about hockey. So I was very conventional at that point. I'd grown up around the game. I'm Canadian. I did all the basic conventional stuff, and I found after writing about hockey for a while that I couldn't really predict anything. Like, I knew all this stuff, I'd scouted and coached, but because you write things down and then you go back and read them, you're like, none of this is helping me predict what's actually going to happen on the ice. So I started reading other blogs by people in and around Calgary and Edmonton, and some of them are now working for NHL teams like Tyler Dello and stuff. So, and they started like pulling concepts and stats from sabermetrics from baseball, right? It wasn't directly from them, but it was obviously inspired by that kind of work. And it was very intimidating at first because I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. But I was also coming from a psychology degree in university, where statistical analysis is a big portion of a lot of psychology. You're looking at what populations are doing and what interventions help them do X, Y, or Z. So it really caught on that way. And when I started applying some of the stuff I was reading, I got better at predicting things. I started winning office or hockey pools, right? So I started understanding fundamentally who was a good player and who wasn't. So no one was really doing that in the Calgary market. So once I started applying that, I got an audience, and it's kind of, rolled from there.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious, who's kind of like your go-to, like your favorite, maybe this is a too favoritism question. Who's like somebody in the analytics verse right now, you're like, wow, what that guy's doing is really interesting and really unique?
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of good people right now.
There's a lot of, and unfortunately because I follow them on Twitter so much, I only know them by their weird,
you're like, oh, top down
Twitter
hockey
handle. Yeah. Exactly. Like Jay Fresh.
Yeah.
Both of those guys.
That's anybody listening is going to know. That's how they're going to know him too. So that's okay.
Yeah.
Throw that out there.
I mean, Dom from The Athletic. I got to work with him briefly when I was at The Athletic. Yeah, that's a super smart guy. I mean, you should listen to the stuff that he's doing. But yeah, there's a lot of like 20-something kids coming out of, statistic degrees and stuff, doing stuff that's way beyond my ken. And I'm really impressed with the talent that's just exploding in analytics. And anyone who like doesn't read that and dismisses it out of hand is missing so much stuff.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like on Instagram, like some account will just like, I'll say something like, oh, I don't know about Noah Hannafin. They're like, yo, my model really likes Hannafin. I'm like, yo, you're like 16 and you've got this pretty awesome and robust model. It's pretty awesome. So it's definitely growing. I did want to pick your brain just kind of league wide. We have to throw a little bit of Oilers hate /talk / what the hell are they doing? Yeah. Your reaction to what Edmonton's done with their blue line this offseason?
I mean, it's been fantastic, hilarious. I've loved the entire thing.
Yeah.
When the Duncan Keith rumors came out, I thought they're going to do it. I know it's going to be Edmonton. It's just so in their wheelhouse, and then they did it, and it was even worse than I thought it was going to be. So
Way worse, yep.
Yeah, and they re-signed Barry. Yeah, Barry is what he is, but there's no defense on that blue line now at all. I don't know how they're going to defend. It's such.
They're going to throw Derek Ryan out there and hope Derek Ryan is just like the only guy who can defend on that team.
Yeah, poor guy. Their forward base probably did improve, albeit at a price.
Mm-hmm.
But that blue line is terrifying. And if Mike Smith, is Mike Smith, I don't know what happened to it last year. He had that little sort of dead cat bounce. But if Mike Smith is Mike Smith, you're going to have an 890 save percentage behind that blue line. That's going to be rough.
Oh, it's going to be fun. I can't wait. And then just one more NHL question. Who's a team you're kind of looking at this season that maybe you're intrigued of what they did on the off season or liked what they did or interested in what you're going to see from them? Is anything off the top of your head?
Not really.
Everything's the same old hockeyman GM stuff. Yeah.
Really, the big thing is Seattle. Like, what is going to happen there? Yeah. I thought they were not nearly as aggressive as they should have been, given their position.
Mm-hmm.
They've accrued an interesting roster. I thought it could have been better. You saw Vegas really leverage trades to make the roster they did, and Seattle hasn't really done that. But that said, it's always interesting to see what an expansion team is going to do.
Who's defense actually got worse? Was it Oilers or the Canucks? I think. God,
the Canucks have the worst defense in the league.
Yeah,
that's horrendous. It's laughably bad. It's like they were trying to make a bad blue line.
Well, dude, like the funniest thing was they were interviewing Benning afterwards and like about the OEL trade. And somebody asked him like, okay, Oliver Ekman-Larsson hasn't been very good. And he said something to the effect of like, yeah, I guess his plus minus has not been very good last few years. I don't really know why. And it was just like,
what?
What?
I missed that. That's quite funny.
It's crazy.
Holy cow. Yeah. It's pretty astonishing. Sometimes I don't even know what the criteria is for the evaluation of these players. It seems to be purely reputational sometimes. Like, hey, that guy was good 5 years ago. He's probably still good, right?
Yep.
Oh, he's not. Sorry.
That's Duncan Keith. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, my last question, then we'll let you go. Obviously, you're on Twitter. You're probably one of the best Twitter follows in terms of getting a beat on what this team looks like underneath the hood, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
So if anybody's listening, definitely follow. What's your handle again? Is this Kent Wilson?
Yeah, Kent_Wilson.
Yeah. I got you my notifications. So, but it's nice, even though you keep a very professional profile, not like us, we're just all over the place. Yeah. But you're still throwing shade at the Oilers. How did you become a Flames fan? And then we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, well, it's been a lifelong thing. So I was born in Calgary. The first I really remember the Flames is the 86 Cup run. So I watched that as a kid. And then, of course, the 89 Cup run. So the Flames were legitimately good for a big portion of my childhood, right? And, of course, as I said, I played hockey naturally. So it's a sort of hand-in-glove type of thing. And then I'm also a small guy. So you had Theoren Fleury come out through the organization and sort of prove all the doubts about shorter players wrong. And that was kind of really inspiring to see when he did it. So that's sort of, I've been stuck as a fan ever since. And we got the 04 run, which was incredible Cinderella stuff. And we've been suffering ever since.
And probably will continue to do so.
Yeah.
All right, man. Really appreciate your time. Mike, you got any closing question or you good?
No, that's awesome, Ken. I know whenever I have a hockey thought, I always rush your Twitter to see, like, I wonder if Ken has tweeted something about this so I can confirm if I'm right or way off base. So I always appreciate the Flames wisdom.
Also feel free to tell me if you think I'm wrong, because there's still a lot of that. It was funny last year before we go. The first 6 games of the year, you had Mangiapane, who was having a rough go. Like he had good underlying numbers, but nothing was going in, right? So I actually had someone comment on Twitter, like, you've made me hate Mangiapane because you kept pumping his tires and now he sucks. And literally the thing I basically said was like, you're overreacting to a 6-game sample. And the freaking guy was awesome for the rest of the year. So it's nice to have little things like that. I have never heard back from whoever that was on Twitter, but it was nice to have that kind of workout at least.
Yeah, no shit, eh?
Yeah.
All right, man. Thanks again.
Well,
really appreciate you jumping on.
Where you blog your blog? You have a blog. You're blogging from your Substack, right? Just plug that real quick.
Very rarely. I call it big body presence. It's kind of an inside joke.
Nice.
And it's very more theoretical and esoteric in terms of here's the way I would run a team in an analytics department. So it is not. I had one thing on the Flames last year, which was you should separate Gaudreau and Monahan, which was before the season started, which they finally did by the end. But
but they had tried everything with Gaudreau and Monahan. I thought they tried everything.
Here's Richie. That'll solve it.
No, I think the fan was saying they should start benching him. Was the
scratch Monahan? Don't split him up.
That was the next solution. But anyways.
Yeah, but I write there only occasionally just because, the day job is a company I'm running. So it's a little busy, but I think I'm going to have something else by the end of the season just because I've got a bunch of stuff bumping around my head. It's not going to be Flames. It's going to be the same sort of theoretical esoteric stuff that nobody likes, but that's what I want to write about now. So that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Cool, man.
Cool. Thanks. Appreciate it, man.
Kent. Have a great night.
We'll see you on Twitter, I'm sure. There you have it, folks. Kent Wilson, super smart guy. Super smart guy. I don't know what to say. I mean, like I mentioned in the interview, beat for beat, I don't think this guy misses anything in terms of if you want to, honestly, he would be a great hire for an NHL team.
If the Flames hired him to consult on half of the moves they make, it'd be so much better.
Yeah. You know how you get excited when fucking you get a good offseason acquisition in a player? If they would announce tomorrow that they hired Kent Wilson to at least be an assistant fucking analytics guy, I'd be stoked.
If they hired Kent to just have a talk to Brad, the only thing he was allowed to say to Brad was yes or no on a player. It's that's the only thing he was there for. It would be totally worth it. They could pay him shit tons of money. It's James Neal, no. Worth it. Troy Bauer, no. Lucic, no. It's just be totally worth it.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned it. Great Twitter follow, but just he'll throughout the season he'll throw down just a subject, and like I said, look under the hood, right? Should they split up Monty Johnny, and then he'll put up charts and analytics and comparisons and all sorts of stuff to support his hypothesis on what's best for the team. And 9 times out of 10, maybe more often, he seems pretty dead on.
Well, yeah, he does a good job of kind of what we try to do, which is look at a topic and dig into it so goddamn deep and just get to the very bottom of it and then kind of work our way back up. He's really good at that.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. It's the off season, so we'll see what else we can throw at you. Once again, as always, thanks for listening.